Hey YouTube, welcome back. This is the Maine Prepper. Grab a cup of coffee, have a seat. Today I want to talk about something that we face all over the world whenever we go somewhere in the military, but also any disaster relief agency. And that is the phases of WROL, or without rule of law. And that can be a major WROL, which is nothing, or a serious disruption. I know in Iraq we had some rule of law there, but it was so minimal and so sparse as to be ineffective. And it was sporadic. We were spot applying ourselves here and there. And so it necessitated having to train up an Iraqi police department and police force. And literally, there was nothing there to build it upon. The buildings were still there, and that was about it. We were forbidden to hire Baathists and all sorts of people that had been in the positions of power and authority in the past. So you can see, it was not an easy task to undertake. And that can be the same thing here if we extrapolate things out a bit. But let's talk about the phases of WROL. I'm looking at my teleprompter whenever I look up, by the way. First of all, there's pre-WROL, and that's where we are right now. The preppers, we're preparing, we're planning, we're laying in provisions in stores, we're buying materials, we're learning new skills, we're thinking about things, we're developing scenarios in our mind, we're learning self-defense, we're learning all of the things that we anticipate we will need during WROL. Now some of us focus on a very short-term event, 90 days or less. Others take a bit longer view. We tend to think of more permanent situation, which will necessitate a rather major change in the way of doing business in this country. And by that I mean just day-to-day life. But let's talk about what's common to all first, and we'll get into the part that's specific to those of us that believe in longer term at the end. First of all, usually we have either a plan to bug out, to bug in, or to bug to somewhere. If you are out on the road and the balloon goes up, as it were, and you've got to get home, you're bugging out back to your location. Or you're bugging to might be a better way to look at it. Other times though, if we have our head to the ground, maybe we can anticipate. For instance, in Hurricane Sandy, I ran into a couple the other day, and they had left right before the hurricane got to town. They just packed everything up, got in the car, went to the hotel, or went to the airport, and they flew over to Hawaii. And they spent the entire vacation time in Hawaii. And rates were cheaper because it's off season. So they got pretty good rates. They'd always wanted to go, so they just did it now. They came home, and their house was just as destroyed as if they had stayed in it. Because I know how strong as I am, I don't think I could push against the wall hard enough to keep a hurricane from knocking the house down, if that was what was going to happen. So it's best you just get out. Other times, though, you're concerned about looters, and certainly we all are. I don't know if it's more painful just the things that they take, or just the idea that they're in your house. It really bothers people. I always feel violated when someone's broken into my home. So I can certainly understand people being very upset about looters. And I have no mercy for those people that do decide to shoot them. Now, that being said, if they're just starving to death and they want a loaf of bread, I feel bad about killing a man over that. But if he's in stealing my TV set and my jewelry and everything, and I have to shoot him to get him to stop threatening my family and everything, I'm not going to feel bad about that in the least. The event in and of itself can be fatal. That's where part of our preparedness has to be, to understand the actual event that we anticipate. If you live right next to a nuclear reactor and you're concerned about it melting down, you want to have your preparedness plans include, and it's probably bugging out. I can't imagine I'd want to live in a lead bunker for the next 100 years. Kind of hard to grow a garden on irradiated soil. So the event in and of itself, we need to learn to get past the event. Whatever the event is that we foresee, we need to be able to get through that event. The event, by comparison to what happens afterwards, is often short-lived. Hurricane Sandy only lasted a few hours. The after effects are still lingering weeks later for many of the people caught in its path. So right after the event, we roll into what we call phase 1 operations. And during phase 1, you have chaos, you have uncertainty, and possibly violence. You also have, this can be at massive levels. We can have huge riots and all sorts of things breaking out. This is what I call the wave effect. It's when all of the people essentially start to impact each other and they start to ripple outward. If 10,000 people flee the city and they go outward, the suburbs have all these people that have to leave now. And suddenly you got 100,000. And then 100,000 becomes a million, and pretty soon you have this giant tidal wave sweeping out into the countryside. And that may be headed soon to you if that happens, even though it's maybe 100 miles away in the big city. You may be in the path, especially if you're near a freeway. I saw that happen during Katrina. The waves of refugees just streaming out of the city. And when they got stuck in traffic and they ran out of gas, they filtered out into the countryside, stealing people's gasoline out of their cars, making messes, going to the bathroom everywhere, and demanding things by pounding on people's doors. And after that, some people I know that weren't gun owners became gun owners, and good for them. That's certainly one of the reasons we have a Second Amendment. The best thing to do during phase one, and this is my recommendation as a professional soldier, is stay off the street. Stay at home. Don't be part of the pre-panic crowds. Don't get out there and joyride. Get a good radio and be able to listen in on communications and traffic and see what's going on in the world around you. Another thing to do is to be in contact with your neighbors. Maybe if you go leave the house, go to their house, that's fine. But don't go venturing into the city. Don't go to see what sort of damage the hurricane did. Stay out of the way. And if it's worse than these things and there's rioting going on, there's people that did this during the LA riots. They got in their car, got curious, went down there and got sucked in and drug out of the car and beaten to death. So you don't want to go down and look at the fire that's burning, because it may be a little bit brighter and hotter than your underwear can stand. Neighborhood watch may need to be implemented. You may need to get together with your neighbors and do a little walking around, going door to door, making sure everybody's okay, doing an area assessment, or atmospherics as we call it in the military, checking on people in the neighborhood. And you may be armed. It may be you need to carefully gauge the situation. If there are armed robbers running up and down the street, shooting people and everything, by all means, put on your chest rig and your body armor and get out there and defend the neighborhood, because the police and the National Guard in that case are probably already overwhelmed. That being said, when they see you walking around with a rifle in your hand, they don't know you're a good guy. So make sure if you hear the National Guard and the military or the police coming along, go back home, put your weapon inside the door, take off your chest rig and wave and say hi. Don't stand out there with a weapon in your hand and confront a deuce and a half truck full of soldiers as they're coming down the road, because they're looking for looters, and guess what? You got a gun. They don't know that you're a homeowner, and you may get yourself shot before they realize that you're one of the good guys. Part of that's going to be your posture too, and how you're carrying yourself. I used to see people in Iraq, and they'd stand there with an AK-47 and they'd wave. AK in the left hand, wave with the right hand. I didn't go bother them. They could have been terrorists, come to think of it. But then again, the terrorists weren't walking around in the daytime with AKs. They were sneaking around at night with IEDs. So they didn't fit the profile. And that's something you don't want to do either. You don't want to fit the profile of a looter. So if this is the day that you were going to move your big screen TV from one house to the other end of the street at another house, don't do it with a rifle across your back. In fact, don't do it at all. Wait till the disaster's over with. All right, so next we move into phase two. Phase one and phase two altogether, about 90 days is what I plan on. Phase two is when we start assessing and the government starts requesting aid. Sometimes they do it beforehand. They declare your area a disaster area and they start sending money in early. However, if that hasn't happened, or let's say it's huge and widespread across the entire nation, there's probably not going to be a lot of aid coming up. People can ask for all the aid they want. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us, especially working with our neighbors, we take an assessment of where we are and we request aid, maybe to help each other. Hey, can I borrow your tractor? You bet. Good, I got diesel. I'll fill it up when I get done. That sort of thing. And we can start working together to begin our repairs and try to return to some form of status quo. Often I find that private citizens, individuals, do a better job of rebuilding and reconstructing their lives than the government will, because you have a motivation to do it and an impetus, and you're a lot quicker at it. Cleanup efforts as well. People after hurricanes often went out with their own chainsaws and cut up the limbs and stacked them on the side of the road, and later the government came by with these big scooper trucks and picked them up. And that worked out really good. If we had waited for the government to come and chop up all the limbs, it would have taken forever. So we did it, and we got on the road within a few days. That was after one of the big hurricanes. If phase 2 doesn't turn things around, let's say it's so widespread and so deep that we cannot turn things around and we can't get back to status quo, this is where phase 3 may come in. Phase 3 is going to be rebuilding and sustaining a new model of life. It's going to be a long-term reconstruction efforts and redirection of our lives. Goodness gracious. I remember before Y2K, the thought of what if there's no electricity would have shut the world down and turned us back 100+ years in this country. And that would have been quite devastating because a lot of people need electricity. People on dialysis machines and everything else. It's not a good place to be. I certainly don't want to be there. I much prefer having the lights on and having everything remain status quo. But I also know enough about human nature and life to know at least if we're not prepared for phase 1 and 2, we're going to be caught flat-footed. Because at some point or another, some disruption always comes along, right? People found that out in the path of Hurricane Sandy. But if phase 3 runs into long term, this is how I've chosen to live my life, is the notion that phase 3 may show up. But rather than dig a deep bunker and line it with lead and hide out and drink bottled water for the rest of my life, I've decided to thrive. And that is, I'm adopting a self-sufficient lifestyle. An easily sustainable lifestyle is another way to look at it. Sustainable living, sustainable farming, sustainable agriculture. These are things that you can sustain on your own without a tremendous amount of external support. That's essentially my place up in Maine, and I hope to be able to raise my own food, have my own water, generate my own power, and these sort of things. These subjects, they fascinate me, but more importantly, they give me a true sense of independence and strength that I did not have before and that I would not be able to enjoy. Indeed, if you're dependent, living hand-to-mouth from your job, and you have no food put back and you have no money put back, you are 3 meals away from living under a bridge. And that's a scary thing. Or as one person put it, most Americans are about 2 paychecks away from being homeless. And that's very, very frightening. I would start taking my surpluses now and start putting them back in the forms of real items and real goods that you will use. Food that you're going to eat is the first thing that comes to mind. Then the ability to get water. Actually, water would be more important than food. But it's hard to put back too much water in your apartment. However, have the ability to procure water from local sources would be immensely helpful to you. There's a video up. We do first. Go have a look at that if you're a little bit lost on where you should go, at least to getting yourself past phase 1 and phase 2. As for phase 3, this channel is going to be really delving into that quite deeply, and hopefully we will do more than just survive. We will thrive. Thank you, folks. This has been the Maine Prepper, and this has been the phases of WROL as I see it. I hope it's given you a little bit of insight, a little bit of motivation, and a little bit of food for thought. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for all of you that are new here. Welcome to the adventure. Those of you that have been around since the beginning, thank you for your faithful viewership and for sticking with me through thick and thin. Have a great day.